Today I decided to give you guys a ranking of the James Bond actors. There are a total of 6 different actors in this series, which began in 1962. I'm not going to include the spin-off movie Casino Royale, which has nothing really to do with the series and is just a spoof, so none of those actors will be included here, because there are multiple different ones in that movie. And I'm not going to include the TV broadcast Bond either. This is just strictly theatrical ones that aren't spoof movies. I've always been a big fan of the James Bond series, and I think it's great that it's lasted so long, and I hope that the next Bond actor, whoever he may be, does a good job as well. But without further ado, let's get started. Coming in last place would have to be George Lazenby. Now, Lazenby is not necessarily a terrible fit for the role, but he only played the character once, and maybe he would have gotten better had he had another chance to do it, but there's nothing really spectacular about his Bond. Now, there's not really a bad Bond on this list. I think they're all at least decent, unlike my Batman list, where there was at least a couple that were underwhelming. These are at least fine, and some are really great. And Lazenby just falls into the fine category. He does the action scenes relatively well. He does seem rather smooth and has a charming way with the ladies, but you don't get that sense of a cold-blooded killer with him. He just seems like he's going through the motions. I do respect that he's not just trying to copy Sean Connery, and he did try to do his own thing, but he's rather forgettable in the role. And though I actually think he has a great Bond movie, one of the best ones in the franchise even, I think he is just an okay Bond.
This never happened to the other fella.
Up next, I have to go with Daniel Craig. Now that may seem a bit low to some, and I can understand if some people disagree with that, but to me he always seemed like they were trying to go for a very intense and really badass kind of Bond that was more intense than the previous iterations, and I think they succeeded partially. For instance, he also seems to be kind of the softest Bond at times. He gets sad more than any other Bond that I can think of, but he also gets angry and more intense than any Bond I can think of. I personally think he's the angriest Bond. He doesn't have the coolest head out of all the Bonds. I think Craig does a damn good job in the role. The action is really great here. He's definitely probably the most action-centric Bond, and he plays it very well. And across his 5 movies, we get something of a rookie agent to a more seasoned agent, agent who's a bit past it, and then a hardened professional senior agent. They're all really good versions, and he plays them all well. Although I do have to admit, his arc felt kind of done in the first 3 movies, and 4 and 5 felt a little bit tacked on as far as the character goes. I think he's pretty much done developing by the time you get to the 3rd film. You could argue, spoiler alert, that him becoming a father maybe gives him some sort of purpose in life, but it feels like just an extra amount of baggage for the character, and I don't really care for the fact of Bond having any kids. But even though some aspects like that don't really work for me, I think Craig does give an intense performance, but it's not quite as suave as Bond should be. Although, if you want just a hardcore Bond, I guess this is the one for you.
Yes. Considerably.
Up next, we have Timothy Dalton. Now, Timothy Dalton is a damn good James Bond. His is probably the most book accurate. I've only read a couple of the books, but he really does encapsulate what you read on the pages. And his is something of a more quiet Bond. He's not as angry or intense as, say, the Daniel Craig Bond, or quite as smooth as, say, like a Roger Moore Bond, but he's somewhere in between. His Bond is more reserved. He doesn't fool around when it comes to the mission, and he does what he has to do to get the job done. He's not necessarily cold per se, but he can be if he has to be. And it's like a more reserved performance of the character, and one that I really like and I feel is a little bit underrated. However, I do think some of the charm that Bond is supposed to have is a little bit lacking here. He gets the killer secret agent part down perfectly, but I think he's missing a little bit of that suave charm that Bond can often have. It's kind of an in-between of the two extremes, but it does work for the 2 films that he does. And I wish he had gotten a 3rd to complete like a trilogy, but I still think Dalton does great in his 2 movies. And I have no major complaints about it, just that it's not quite suave enough, but definitely intense and badass enough.
7 here. I'll report in an hour.
Won't you join me?
Better make that 2.
Up next, I have to go with Roger Moore. Now, Roger Moore might actually have my favorite run as a Bond actor. He actually is in the most official Bond films, Not necessarily the most Bond films, because Connery did 7 as well, but one of his was unofficial, being that it was made through Warner Brothers. The only actor to be in more Bond films was the actor who played Q, and I think that Roger Moore really did own the part from the early 70s all the way to the mid 80s. The only downside to his Bond is that he could occasionally get in rather goofy situations. He always played it straight, but the Roger Moore Bond era was definitely the lighthearted, often silly Bond era. But despite that, he still shows up in every movie with a sense of coolness and badassery that is just great. Now, he can get intense when he needs to, and he can be a cold-blooded killer. There's even a scene in one of my favorite films, For Your Eyes Only, where he literally kicks a guy in a car off the edge of a cliff, pretty much cold-bloodedly, even though the guy posed no real threat at the time. But then there's also moments where he's dressed up like a clown, literally, and those can be a bit silly. However, no matter the situation, Moore always brings it with a level of suave and coolness, while also being intense if he needs to be. He's not as hardcore as Daniel Craig or even Dalton for that matter, but he's hardcore enough to be a badass and suave enough to really win you over, and he's one of my favorite James Bonds.
But I don't think your Uncle Harry would approve.
Him? He thinks I'm still a virgin.
Yes, well, you get your clothes on. I'll buy you an ice cream.
Coming in at number 2 would have to be Pierce Brosnan. Now, Pierce Brosnan was actually supposed to be Bond before Dalton, but unfortunately he ended up losing out on the role because he was doing a TV show at the time and couldn't get out of his contract. But after Dalton's run, they finally got Brosnan, and he starred in 3 amazing Bond films and 1 not-so-amazing one. But regardless of the film, this is one of the most calm, cool, and collected Bonds of the entire franchise. He may even be the most well-rounded Bond, bringing the perfect level of suaveness, coolness, intensity, and pure-blooded killer to the role that I've seen. Unfortunately, though, he's still not my favorite because I don't think he quite has that charm as my number 1 spot, but is damn close. He's an amazing choice for the character, and I think he's a bit underrated, too. I think people often overlook him versus like Daniel Craig, or even my number 1 pick, but I think that he really does encapsulate the character extremely well. He was the more modern era, although his movie is 30 years old now, but he encapsulated the modern era of Bond that we needed at the time, something to move us away from 80s Bond into the 90s and even early 2000s. It was the Bond we needed at the time, and it's really the Bond of my childhood. And I think that he captured the character so well. It even stars in probably the best Bond movie, GoldenEye. There's no real flaws with the character, and I think that Brosnan completely brings it, and you completely buy him as this suave, attractive, badass, killer, secret spy who can woo the ladies and save the world. Pierce Brosnan is an amazing James Bond.
No more foreplay.
But coming in at number 1 would have to be Sean Connery. Now, this is kind of a cliche choice, and maybe some people would say a basic answer, but it is common for a reason, because he's just the best. I personally feel that Sean Connery really did encapsulate the character absolutely perfectly. Not necessarily the most book accurate, mind you, but definitely the best interpretation for the big screen. I wouldn't say he's necessarily as well-rounded as Pierce Brosnan, but it brings a certain charm and intensity to the character that's just great. He doesn't have the action that's as intense or realistic as Daniel Craig, being that his movies are older, but he plays it off so well and so naturally and so cool. He just slips into the role unlike anyone else. You feel that this guy really is a secret agent, and it's what he's good at, and it's what he lives for. He's having a damn good time doing it. He's intense when he needs to be, but he's also suave when he needs to be. He's a ladies' man, he's a badass, he's a killer, and he has a presence on the big screen that perfectly encapsulates this character. No matter how you feel about the series or the actors that play him, when you see Sean Connery in the role, you think, oh yeah, that guy's James Bond. He played the character across 7 films, 6 official ones and 1 made through Warner Brothers, and he does a great job throughout the entire series. It is unfortunate because he was going to come back for Skyfall and play another character, but it more or less James Bond in spirit, and it was going to help Daniel Craig fight some bad guys, which would have been amazing, but at the last minute it just didn't go through. But even though we never got to see Sean Connery in the role again past the 1980s, he was still great in all 7 of his movies, and I highly recommend watching all of them. My favorite James Bond, the most cool, the most well collected, and the most awesome.
Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Well, that's my list. I do hope going forward that they can recast the character in a way that makes sense and get someone who can really encapsulate what is in the books, but also what came before it in the movies. Let me know who your favorite James Bond is down below, or just leave your own list. I thank you all for watching, and peace out.
Say hello to Dink.
Hi, Dink.
Dink, say goodbye to Felix. Man talk.